In today's video, we're going to be talking about social media and its role in the conventional news media. I am recording this video in June of 2022, where things are a little different from where they were about 10 years ago. At this point, I would say that things like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, I guess Snapchat maybe to some degree, not as much as before. Primarily Twitter, I would say, plays a big role in why the news looks the way it does. And this is very different from how things were, again, say 10 years ago or so, 12 years ago, when Twitter was first on the scene. At the time, I remember Twitter was more of a place where people would talk about, what they had for breakfast. That was the big joke about it. Or comedians would be making jokes that wouldn't actually get a lot of attention in many cases, or people would just kind of talk more about quaint whatever sort of things. It wasn't a very impactful place, but something changed, I want to say around maybe 2014-15, maybe coinciding with the US presidential elections at the time. Things got very serious on Twitter. Donald Trump played a big role in that, I would say, to some degree, but I think it would maybe precede him to some degree as well. The Obama administration were actually very social media savvy, and they were kind of early compared to other politicians, other political outlets or whatever, getting on social media and trying to use it to their advantage. And I don't say that with any partisan flavor. I'm just observing what I'm observing or what I have observed. So social media, and Twitter in particular, started to take on a pretty serious bent, I would say, around the mid to 2010s, like 2014, 15 or so. And certainly by the time 2016 came around, it was very, very serious. To the point where today it is actually quite routine for journalists to go to Twitter for story ideas, to see what's trending, to see what people are saying. They'll base an entire story around a tweet or a series of tweets or a spat on Twitter. That is actually quite new compared to how things used to operate in the conventional news business, say in the earlier days of Twitter, as I'm saying. I remember a time where newsrooms that I worked in, still work in, would dismiss Twitter and talk about like, oh, whatever happens on there is just nonsense. It's whatever. We're not going to take it seriously. There was a time where Twitter was routinely dismissed as nothing significant, just internet chatter. The internet in general was like that at one point, and it's become steadily more and more serious as it's sort of seeped into every aspect of our lives. But Twitter, by this point, by mid 2022, is a very serious driver, a very important driver of the day's events in terms of news. And again, reporters will routinely now go to Twitter first, maybe even before going out into the real world and, meeting people, checking things out, writing about what they see and experience. That's what journalism was for a long time. But increasingly, a lot of it is people just going on Twitter, seeing what's trending, see what's going on, and making that into a news story, which incentivizes a lot of people to get something trending on Twitter, to make that a sort of focus of attention, to get their thing trending, their story trending, to make a scene, so to speak, on Twitter, because there's this intuitive understanding now that Twitter is the place where you get attention. More so maybe than Instagram and TikTok, although TikTok is growing a lot too. They all reference each other. You'll see Twitter accounts that have TikTok material posted there and Instagram material. They're all working in concert together. But social media has become a serious driver of news to the point where it's not really clear who's affecting who. It's all mixed in so thoroughly now that something will start on Twitter, it will become a news item that will lead to Twitter reaction, which then becomes another news item. They're feeding into each other pretty consistently at this point. Is this a good thing? Not entirely clear. There's many opinions on the subject. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt from NYU, I believe that's the school he's affiliated with, has actually written a lot about how he thinks that social media is driving people insane and is not necessarily leading to a better society. You can look into his work. It's Jonathan Haidt. Maybe I'll include a link at the bottom of some of the things he's done. He talks about how Twitter in particular has led to more conflict and division, and the news media has played a role in that by, again, using Twitter to make stories, to actively promote certain thoughts and ideas, some of which are very noble and well-intentioned and good, and others might just be adding fuel to the fire of the many cultural battles that are ongoing at any given time, at least in the Anglosphere and English language society. So the point of this video, and I will certainly be doing more videos on this topic in the future, is that by this point, social media plays a massive role, I would say, in how the news looks, seems, is, because once again, people in the news business, including coworkers of mine, colleagues of mine, will be actively going to Twitter to find story ideas and to write about them. And then they actively hope that once their story is published through their outlet, whatever they work for, whoever they work for, that will get reaction and traction on Twitter, so then they can write another one even further. It's become a sort of barometer, a gauge for how news even does. There was a point where, you know, you'd write an article, it'd run in a physical newspaper, like a printed paper newspaper, and it wasn't entirely clear how well it did. Like, did people read it? Did people like it? You know, maybe letters to the editor would be some indication of that. Oh, we got a lot of letters about this one. But it was a lot more vague at one point to know what articles were doing well, what were not. Twitter sort of solved that by giving very clear and hopefully somewhat accurate metrics as to how a story is playing out in the wider world. But that has its own consequences, its own incentives that could be damaging to society in some ways. Again, it's a big topic, and I welcome anyone who's watched this video to share how they feel about it below. And believe me, I'll definitely be doing more videos on this topic. But for the purposes of this video, social media, yes, I can confirm as a news worker, is playing a massive role in the shape of the news day. And many people within the news business fully understand this and are aware of it, encourage it. Others are a little more queasy and uncomfortable. There's a wide range of opinions, but as opposed to, say, 10 years ago when it was like, oh, what's for breakfast? You know, that stuff is all done. Now Twitter is a very serious social political battleground of ideas and issues and conflicts, and the news is playing an active role in keeping that all going, for better or for worse. So we'll be talking about this more in future videos, but once again, thanks for watching and stay tuned for more content.